All right, everybody, we are back again for another episode of the Coach's Compass. Remember, don't know what episode it is because we just continue to roll. All we know is it's season 2, right? So we're season 2 of the Coach's Compass. It's your boy, Coach Coop. Again, Coach Jay can't be with us tonight because his timing, our timing is all off because we're just on different sides of the world right now. But don't forget, hit that like, subscribe, comment button down below as we continue to have this thing grow and continue to bring on cool guests from all over the world. Now today, we have Coach Connor with us. He just left the team setting after a decade to start his own rehab performance business, starting his whole system from scratch and diving deep into the return to play and deceleration. So, Coach, thank you for being here with us tonight and welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to be here.
So, where were you at in the team setting and what made you leave and now start your own thing?
Yeah, I'll give you the kind of snapshot of my journey. A lot of stops along the way. So I grew up in South Dakota, played ball at a real small D2 school. From there, I started interning in college, went around to Colorado State, Wake Forest, Miami, Mississippi State. Got my first gig at Pitt. Went back to Mississippi State as the associate director. Spent a year with the Arizona Cardinals. Took some time off during COVID and then got back where I spent the last 3 years with Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia, where I was the director of sports science and return to play. Yeah, it was a wild journey. I think there was like 10 moves in there along the way. I wouldn't recommend that to anybody. It was kind of fun to do while I was young, but yeah, it was definitely a wild journey. I'm glad I did it. Um, but to say all that, these last 3 years, they were real. It was a great experience, but I just knew that I was at a point in my life where I was ready to make a change. And for me, I had started to kind of pick a niche in the return to play side of things. And I figured, hey, like this is really what I, derive a lot of my joy from. So if I could just do this full time, man, and so decided to move up to Pittsburgh, PA with my girlfriend. She's from here. And yeah, just getting this thing off the ground, rebuild performance rehab, where primarily just doing high end return to play and some performance and some coaching education.
How has it been to try to get it off the ground? Because I mean, that's a hard part for a lot of us. Even if you're coaching or you're an athlete and you're trying to start your own thing, right? Trying to kind of break away from the mold and kind of find that niche, like you said, and then build it from the scratch. How has that been, and what are some of the ups and downs you've been going through?
Yeah, man, it's been fun. I really enjoyed it. I know nothing about business. Like I said, the last 10 years of my life, I've been coaching in a team setting. I knew exactly where I needed to be, when I needed to be there. My whole day was already planned out for me. Um, that was cool. It was easy. And now I'm in a situation where it's all on me. And it's daunting for sure, right? Where like you just don't really have the security that you had in the past of like, hey, I know my teams are showing up at 6 o'clock and I know my paycheck is coming every 2 weeks. And, that was cool. But, now I'm in this situation where, I'm stepping into a whole different side of things, right? Like training is still training, athletes are still athletes, rehab is still rehab. But the business side of things is something that, I've never really had to explore. And it's felt like a lot at times, but I've tried to I've tried to slow cook the process and enjoy it. I've been really fortunate. I got to reach out to some really cool people in the field that are already doing what I do, and that was one of the things that they kept saying to me was, you know, the initial part is going to be tough getting this thing off the ground, but enjoy that process, man, because you only get to do that once, right? Like you only get, like, hopefully, anyways, hopefully, only have to start a business one time, and
Yeah.
and man, just really like lean into it, man, and enjoy it. Try to do this thing right. It's really easy to get spread thin really fast. There's so many different things that
Yep.
I never really would have thought about. Right, like when I was getting into this, I was like, oh, I need some space, I need some equipment, we're good to go, right? And then it's like you start talking about LLCs and the legal side and the banking and doing the books and all this stuff that I'm like, this is not my forte, but it's been cool, man. It's definitely one of those things that I'm grateful for because it's expanded me and my skill set, I think, to a side of things that I never would have had in the college side. So it's been fun, man. I'm really enjoying it so far.
That's good. Now, why return to play? And for a lot of our listeners that are maybe athletes on that side don't really know what it means. But what is return to play?
Yeah, so I think if you think about like performance and injury right now, I think in the field, and like if you've been working in the field, I think particularly at a high level, you understand that there's this gap that a lot of people talk about, but for whatever reason, it just hasn't really been filled. So if you look at like traditional treatment, right, after an injury, athlete gets injured, let's say in like a long term scenario, right, there's this extended period of time of passive treatment where you're doing stem, you're doing ice, you're resting, you're doing all these things. And then based off of like predetermined timelines, like okay, the average person comes back in 6 months after this injury. You get this like super fast, sharp rising edge and like specific loading and rushing athletes back into their sport, and it leaves athletes vulnerable. It leaves them detrained. They're not as confident coming back. They just feel off, right? I think a lot of us, like, if you played sports for an extended period of time, you've had an injury and you know what that feels like, right? Where I think you're starting to see the field move towards now is a little bit more of like a tactical model and a performance mindset, right? Like, so much of the medical field is driven from general population. And if you've worked in either setting, you understand that working with general population versus elite athletes in returning them and preparing them for the demands of their sport are two drastically different things, right? Like it's easy to get somebody back to like a satisfactory level of life is a whole nother thing to prepare somebody for the
Right.
demands of football, basketball, whatever it is, right? So all that to say, what you're seeing in the field now is more of a tactical model where we're taking this performance mindset of, okay, this is where the athlete is right now. This is where they need to be, right? And then we reverse engineer the sport, the injury, and the athlete and identify, like, okay, like working back to front, how can we incrementally work them back to an even heightened state of performance than before they got injured, right? Because if I just get them back to where they were before, like, cool, that's what got them there in the first place, right? So it's easy to get somebody back to
Right.
their sport. How can I actually identify what caused this problem, or at least some of the pieces that maybe have led to it, start to solve maybe some of those issues and put them in a position to be even more successful than when they came back? And that's kind of where you're starting to see this return to play, reconditioning, rehab journey kind of start off, I think, in our field.
So how do you know? Like, how do you reverse engineer? Like, if you're talking about bringing somebody back, maybe that has an ACL injury, right? And maybe you didn't know them as an athlete before they got hurt. You didn't see how they moved and stuff, and now you're getting them like right with that time when I said it's nine to 12 months, right? When they start doing like they're trying to return to play. How are you knowing how to reverse engineer their whole like procedure to get them better than what they were before?
Yeah, so it's a good question, man, and it's probably the one that I get the most, right? Like, especially from performance coaches, where it's really common where, and this is a whole nother issue of like, okay, you're going to spend the first 4 months with the PT and the AT, and then boom, we'll hand you off to the strength coach, and it's your show now. And it's like, man, like
Right.
that's just not how it should work, right? Like, just common sense would say like everybody to some degree should be involved in the process from day one all the way till the return to sport, right? But in that scenario where you do that, man, I think like it can be challenging. But I think the cool thing about the return to play process, like it really is just a linear progression. Uh, so I think about it like this: like it's a vertically integrated model where everything is present at all times of the rehab process, and we're just kind of linearly working our way back through that, right? And we do that by reverse engineering the sport and the demands and some of the stuff that we already talked about. And for me, and what you're starting to see a lot of like high level practitioners do is just like they refer to them as high intensity actions. So like what are the high intensity actions that make up your sport? Right. So from like a general standpoint, if we're talking field and core sport athletes, we're looking at max velocity, acceleration, deceleration, and change of direction. Each one of those things have, certain physical qualities, certain movement qualities, um, that we can start working on way sooner than I think a lot of people think, right? And just identifying like, okay, like what's the lowest common denominator that we can start to work on of those actions and then gradually progress those actions throughout the duration of a return to play. Right. So let's just say, acceleration, like day one, that may just be restoring gait, right? Like, can you walk normal for me? Right. And then as we get deeper into this process, we can start getting into projection and then some resisted acceleration, some longer accelerations, all the way until, we're back to playing our sport again. Right. So I think it's just understanding like, okay, like what are the demands from a physical standpoint, and using those high intensity actions as a gauge, as opposed to maybe a little bit more of a traditional model where you are, you know, using some of that plods based running where it's a lot of jogging, it's a lot of, slow things. Like they're not really things that prepare you for your sport, right? Like my dad's 70 years old, he jogs 2 miles every morning, right? Like it's not that tough. But sprinting, changing direction, jumping, all those things, like those are the things that we need to prepare the athletes for. And using those as a gauge for the return for me has kind of been a game changer since I've started to go down that route.
How hard is it though to get to bridge that gap though? You know, you talk about that in between from going for physical therapy and they just get handed right back to the strength and conditioning coach and it's like, all right, strength and conditioning coach, figure it out, like get them back on the field. How hard is it to get PTs, coaches, athletes, all that to like realize like, hey, like that middle part in between there before they're handed back to their strength and conditioning coach, like is a huge importance for you to be involved and all of us just to be involved from the beginning of this.
Yeah, man, it's tough. Like I think a lot of people think that like the higher the level you go, the less and less likely you are to see that, man. And I'll tell you, as someone that's been fortunate to be around pretty much every level at every sport, like it's present everywhere. And it's tough, man, especially if you don't have the right people in the building. Like that's the biggest one. Like if you don't have people that are willing to drop their egos um, and put those things to the side and try to find a way to collaborate together for the best interest of the athlete, man, it's going to be tough. It's like I'll tell you this, man. Like I could take an athlete, um, let's just say tears their ACL day one. I could take them all the way back to return to sport by myself, right? Like I've done it. I'm confident I could do it, but I'm also like have an understanding like of my own skill set to be able to say like, okay, like there are a lot of people out there better than me than that in those initial stages with the passive treatments, some of the correctives, the mobility, whatever it is. Like, so I think understanding, like having an understanding of what your skill set is, like the people in that network, how can you logistically pull that thing off, right? Because like I think that's one of the toughest parts that people don't account for is just like like one thing that I would love to do is like get sport coaches involved in the return to play process early on. But the reality is they got 30, 40, 50, 100 other kids that they got to worry about. Like it's just not always feasible. So I think trying to find a way to, one, make sure everyone's on the same page, make sure that everybody's skill set is being used correctly. Um, and then finding the people that actually do have the time to handle some of those things kind of throughout that process for me, man, is I think is so key and one of those things that it's easy to get lost in. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm not sure
No,
there is
it
a
definitely
perfect.
answers it. What I don't know if there is a perfect answer for that one because it's like you
Yeah,
said, like you got coaches that are dealing with 30, 40 players. The same thing with physical therapists, right? They have somebody that they're working with. Same thing with your strength and conditioning coach. Like so, there's so many pieces in there that are hard to determine like how to answer that. But
yeah,
for you on your side, you're talking about return to play. Um, and everybody has like their stuff like inside their work that they really like to work with. Like so inside your niche, like for what you're doing, you have a specific injury that you love like bringing players back from. Like you say ACL, you say like ankles, you say hamstring tears, like shoulder injuries. Like what is something that you like? You're like, man, this is my bread and butter right here. Like this is my go-to. I love it.
yeah. Honestly, man, I'd probably say ACLs, and selfishly, just because that's the time where I know that I'm going to get the athlete one on one the most, and I'm going to have the most control over
Mm-hmm.
what's going on. I love. I would say like lower extremity in general is good, man. because I just enjoy that aspect of it. I enjoy the reconditioning piece, getting them back out on the field and kind of working them back through. Um, but if you get a hamstring, that hopefully that's only 21 to 28 days. If you get a groin, it could just be a couple days, right? With an ACL, man, like to me, that is such a great opportunity. And that's one of those things, like if you're listening to this and you work in this setting, man, like, or if you ever get the opportunity to work with an athlete that has an ACL, take advantage of it, man, because at no other point in their career are you going to get to work with an athlete one on one without having to compete with the stressors of the sport. Um, Man, I think if you do it right, you can set an athlete up for success for the rest of their career better than any other scenario, right? Because if you just think about it, man, like so much of the adaptable energy that goes towards, you know, um, that athlete is geared towards their sport, right? Like I mean, that's the challenge of strength and conditioning in the team setting where you are training athletes that are um, practicing 5 to 6 days a week. They're going to their other trainers on the side or whatever it is, right? um, but if you get to work with an ACL kid for, I mean, that's 6 to 12 months depending upon the case, where you know you really get to start from ground zero and build that thing up the right way, man. Like I I've just been so fortunate enough to be around so many cases now, man, where like you get to have like a pretty everlasting impact on that kid, not just physically, but I think psychologically too, where like I've seen athletes come out of that thing just a completely different person, man. And it is such a gift to be able to sit there and, take all that in and be a part of that journey. It's so much fun.
I can tell how passionate you are about that, right? Like I can tell by how
Yeah,
you
man, you
speak
just keep
about it, like
going.
how much you enjoy bringing guys back from those ACL injuries. Now, if you look at coach yourself, like 10 years from now, right? You already started your own business, right? You're already kind
Yeah.
of in the groundworks in the trenches. You look 5, 10 years down the line for yourself. Where do you hope to be at in this field of return to play and working with deceleration? Like, if you have thought about it yet, like what's the goal for it all?
Yeah, man. It's interesting. I wish I wish I had more of a clear picture. Because this thing and deciding to get into this, side of things and do my own thing it's been such a it kind of came out of nowhere, right? Like, so to pull the layers back a little bit, last couple of years, man, I'd been interviewing for, what I thought was my dream jobs at pretty much every level of every sport you can think of, right? Like, um, and because I thought that's what I wanted. And then, I kept getting rejected. I was a finalist for jobs over and over again. And it got to a point, man, where like I just decided to take like a step back and say like, oh, like, is this really what I want? Like, because I look back at the like last 10 years of my career and it's like, man, I never really enjoyed that part of it that much. Like, what I enjoyed was the return to play piece and the relationships and training. Uh, and so just kind of out of nowhere, man, I ran in, full steam ahead with this and just getting this thing off the ground, man. And, where this thing's going to be at 5 to 10 years from now, I really don't know. I think for me, I want to try to build this thing as vertical as possible. Like, and that's part of like my journey. And like, if you're a young coach out there listening to this, man, like, I'd say this, like, figure out what you want out of your career in your life. Because everything else becomes, I think, so much more easy to navigate once you do. So, like, for me, man, like, I realize, like, I know I want to do return to play. I don't want to oversee other employees, right? Like, I don't want to bring in like a bunch of other people into this business. I don't want to scale this thing out to like trying to work with thousands of athletes and, you know, um, so for me, man, like my goal with this thing is like, how can we get this thing running and off the ground? And then from there, just build vertical of like, okay, like instead of trying to, touch as many athletes as I can, how can I try to make my time more valuable? Right? How can I increase the value of my product? How can I, continue to give back to the field? Like for me, those are the things that are important to me. And so for what that's going to look like down the road, I hope it's the same thing that I'm doing now, just at a better scale and a better product, and hopefully making a little bit more money way.
That's
So we'll see.
awesome.
One thing that's really important to me is like giving back to the field. Like I do really enjoy the mentorship aspect of this thing. I've gotten to work with some really cool young coaches and interns along the way, and like getting to have a hand and be a part of their journey and helping them grow is something that's really important to me. So definitely later on down the road, I think that'll be a piece of it. Bringing other coaches in and helping them grow. And what I'd love to see, man, is like for what people that do what I do, like performance coaches transitioning to the reconditioning side of things, man, like I would love for that to be a norm in our field. And if I could just find a way to be a part of that, and kind of help grow that niche, like that's something that I would think that would definitely be a part of the plan down the road.
Well, you're one step closer to it, right? I mean, all those other places that told you no, that didn't give you your dream job, then you're kind of in the spot that you, I guess, were destined to be in now. You know what I mean? Like, it's crazy how things kind of start falling into places when you kind of set what you want to get to and just kind of run with it, and everything else just kind of becomes junk. But we have a question for you from one of our former guests that have been on, right? And that question
Yeah,
is based off your physicalities. What would you want to tell your younger self?
that's probably a whole other podcast in itself. Man, let's see here. What would I tell my younger self? I'd say this, man. Just looking at like some of the mistakes that I made along the way. Um, don't try to be something that you're not. Um, I think once you're getting into this field, man, and like especially if you're going like be very selective who you go work for and work under. Because whether you like it or not, if you're working in the team setting, like those people are going to have an impact on you one way or the other. And I got to work for some amazing people, and I'm fortunate. Some great people, some great practitioners, but at the same time, man, like I got to a point in my career where it was very obvious to myself where I was trying to be something that I wasn't. And like if you've worked in sports or played in sports at all, like you think about like the best coaches that you've had, they're always the realest ones and the ones that you knew what you were going to get out of them. Whether you liked them or not, like you knew who they were and they were real. And man, there was a part of my career where that was not what I was being. So that would be a big one. Man, listen to your gut. That'd be another huge one. I took some bad advice, kind of down the road against my better judgments. That one, I think more often than not, man, if you take the time to think about it and talk it out with your people, like you're going to have an understanding of what it is that you really want, what you should do. And I made that mistake of going against my better judgment, what I knew I should have been doing. And that burnt me bad. And then the last one, and one that um, you've probably heard before if you've asked this question, is I burnt myself out bad. And man, you really do have to take care of yourself before you can take care of other people, right? Like I put myself in the hospital a couple times, put myself out of work. I was on disability for a while just because I was so enthralled in this process of making everything work. Trying to grind my way to the top. And man, it just came back to bite me in the worst way possible. And to a point where I almost had to get out of the field. And if I was smarter, I probably would have. But, I am thankful for it now just because it did give me a sense of understanding of like what truly matters. And man, if you're a young coach out there, listen to this, I would just say it again, man. Like, take care of yourself, right? Like, your job isn't going to be there for you in 10 years. Your family, your friends,
Right.
your health, like that's the stuff that's going to be there for you. So don't neglect that stuff. Like you're going to have to work hard. Like if you're going to make it in this field, like you're not going to make it if you don't. You won't last long. But at the same time, man, you got to find whatever that balance is for you. Because I'm telling you, man, it's tough. And I'm one of the lucky ones who survived it. I know some other coaches, man, um, that weren't as fortunate enough to me that I've had to struggle with that for a long time.
Man, that's as real as it gets right there. And the last thing I want to ask you is what would you want us to ask our next guest that comes on?
Ooh. It's probably the same thing as that, but just, I'd word it a little bit different in the sense of like, what were some of the biggest lessons that you learned from the mistakes that you've made. It's really easy to, I think, come on these podcasts and talk about all the things like the good stuff that you've done and your thoughts and your philosophy and all that stuff, man. But like the stuff that you don't hear, I think, as much more, and like where I think we need a little bit more transparency in this field is like, hey man, like what mistakes have you made along the way, and like what did you learn from it? Because like that's the stuff they don't put in textbooks. Programming,
Hell no.
career development stuff, like resumes and all that jazz. Like it's cool, it's important, but man, like there's so many things I wish I would have known getting into this thing that would have made my life a whole lot easier. So, what mistakes have you made, and what did you learn from them?
I love it. I love it because we're learning from guys like yourself, right? Guys that have been in the industry. We're following y'all, right? Because I'm 32. I guess I'm freshly. I guess so you would call me a younger guy in the field. But I understand what you guys are going through because the same thing that a lot of us went through when we were trying to figure out what's next for life and after football or after whatever sport we're playing. So learning from a lot of y'all is important, and learning and hearing from what you're saying is good, right? Hearing that is not such an easy path is always nice to know that like what we're feeling now, that like, hey, like, and it's a lot of stress on a lot of different things. It's good to know that we aren't the only ones going through it. So I want to say thank you, man, for keeping it real with us and helping out these younger coaches in this field and continuing to push on. I can tell you that we're looking up to you, and I know the next things that you go on to do are going to be great, man. So looking forward to the journey, and thank you for being here with us today.
I appreciate it, man. Had a great time doing this, man. And if there's anyone out there listening that I could ever help out, man, feel free to reach out.
For sure, and we're out.